Well, folks, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out this evening. As you can see, I'm setting up the gear here. So we have a more intimate group tonight, which I think is great. And what we wanted to do was really make this more a conversation. Yes, we're going to cover specific topics. This is going to be yours. You can share this evening, which is, I'll go ahead and kind of tell you a little bit about it. So the first piece is we want you all walking out knowing really kind of covering three sort of specific topics. And the first one is, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, when do I start to think about investing in sales development? So that's the first piece. We're going to actually start to think about that and discuss it. The second piece is, once I have that individual on the team, how do they start to begin to build a sales development team? So everything from like, who should I be hiring? What do they look like? To putting on an onboarding process. These are things that are really important. A lot of the time as founders or startups, we sort of cut corners and start to do this stuff later on. And then lastly, we're going to share some best practices with you folks around prospecting. And here's the thing, let's have a conversation. I mean, how intimate is this setting, right? This is great. Thank you so much to Emergence Capital. Absolutely. We should have started off by saying that. Thank you so much for that. Katie is phenomenal. So first of all, does that all make sense? And is there anything else that we want to cover tonight? And of course, feel free, don't be shy.
Yeah, I think we have it in the fridge.
Okay, great. So go ahead. Here you go.
Oh, thank you.
Jorge.
Yes.
Thanks, Santi's gonna kick us off.
Okay, perfect. Santi, here you go. Santi, from Argentina, where I'm going to be in December, by the way.
You're going to talk about saying the last name, right? Yes. So, hello everyone. I'm Santi with Emergence Capital. Thanks very much for coming here. This is our home. This is where we spend most of our time working with people like you, and really enjoy doing this. Former entrepreneur, so I've been selling all my life. I've been selling as an entrepreneur when I started my company, and I'm selling right now as a venture capitalist, trying to find the best companies, trying to convince you guys to join our company. So the job of a salesperson is the job that makes us who we are. So I'm pretty excited to learn what this panel is going to share with us. And again, thanks very much for coming here. This is your place. Whenever you need a place to crash here in San Mateo, let us know. We are excited to have you here. This is where we get our energy from. Thanks very much, George, for organizing this. It's like when George and I met a few months ago, we connected really well. I mean, we think alike in terms of how we care about entrepreneurs, how we care about people, and how we care about helping entrepreneurs succeed in whatever they want to do with their lives. So thanks very much for organizing this.
So we're going to go around the amazing panel today, starting off with Koka. Just a quick introduction, because I think it is important.
Thank you for coming, everyone. So I'm Koka Sexton. I am the former head of social media at LinkedIn. I recently left and have started my own company doing consulting and that type of work for startups and some larger companies on how to leverage social media to drive revenue. That's my primary focus, is how do you make money off of status updates, essentially.
That's cool. Isn't that amazing? Now you know why I love social so much. My good friend Daniel Barber.
Thank you, George. So thank you, George, for organizing, and thank you everyone for making the trip, either down from the city or coming to your local spot. So Daniel Barber, I am the former VP of Revenue at Node.io. I'm also advising there today. I moved here in San Francisco in 2011, joined a company called Responsus at about 80 million in revenue, joined as an individual contributor, actually as an SDR, so know the pain if any of you are actually doing that role today, and left running and leading a 34-person team across five different countries. Responsus was acquired for 1.5 billion from Oracle. Joined ToutApp as the first executive in the organization, built the sales development team and sort of operations team there, and then moved over to Node, and now a free agent, although I'd say that'll probably last about a week. So I've enjoyed my 30 days of empowerment.
This works. Hey, I'm Sean Kester with SalesLoft, VP of Product Strategy. Was one of our first 5 employees there, and my first job was to be an SDR. Then I grew that team. Then I moved into product, and now I have an ambiguous title, but I handle product marketing and integrations, and then some of the business development stuff. So that first hire that you guys make, I could give you some advice on what they need to do and what I probably shouldn't have done. But I'm excited to be here, and we're also an Emergence Capital portfolio company, so it's the home away from home.
Hello, my name is Kristin Brey. I'm the token female on the panel this evening. I am the Director of Sales Development at Optimizely. I was Director of Sales Development at Optimizely. In one way or another, I've been working in sales development since the beginning of my career, whether on purpose or not. Prior to Optimizely, I was also the first SDR at another Andreessen portfolio company called Instart Logic, where I ended up growing a team of 12 before then moving over to Optimizely to help with their outbound strategy, and then getting promoted to Director of Sales Development. And we now have a team of 20 globally that we are starting to grow again for next year.
Awesome, thank you. So I wanted to take a quick poll. How many of us here are founders? Okay, great. How many are sales development leaders, or let's say just sales managers? Fantastic. And how many of us are individual contributors, let's say on a sales development team? Okay, so we have the whole shebang here. Fantastic. I wanted to kick off by asking Kristin, you were early at a startup, you were the first SDR. Now in retrospect, that you're looking at that process, because a lot of the time we learn so much about what we shouldn't have done, right? What would you say if to all the founders here in the room around when is the right time to start investing in sales development, and what does that actually look like during those early days?
Well, I think it depends on what sales strategy you're using. So when I started, we had mostly field reps, and so it made sense to have someone who was anything that was inbound, anything that was, you could generate not through existing relationships, because all of the AEs had the relationships they had and they were trying to work those. So I think that made a lot more sense to have someone who was much more junior managing that. And also, I did all of the things as far as like setting up Salesforce and had a lot of experience with trial and error doing that. Versus if you're going with more of an inside sales model, you can hire, you have more junior people who can run the whole sales cycle from prospecting to close. Then it kind of depends on as far as, do you need to specialize right away? But I would say if you're definitely starting with field sales, having people on the home ground who can work the leads, because trying to manage people in the field to work those inbound leads is probably not going to happen.
Are we saying as soon as we get a couple outbound or outside salespeople rather who are closing full cycle, we should start investing? Then that's kind of the.
I think so. I think there's, because you can only, especially with people who have their Rolodex and they're on the field, like there's only so much they can do going from meeting to meeting, and so having someone who's at HQ, who's working the territory, finding different things that on the internet, and like their day is mostly spent at a desk, partnering with their field rep and being able to do a lot of the work, and as a partnership that they wouldn't be able to necessarily do from their car, from meetings, or with executives.
Got it. Now, Daniel, I know recently you were super early at Node and really helped build that entire sales process. I know for a fact. What would you say is, sort of a higher priority hire for the founder, the closer rep or that SDR, and then you have, let's say, the founder doing the sales?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting question, and one that's debated a lot. So Sarah Livingston, who founded Y Combinator, wrote a good post on sort of, do you invest in marketing or do you invest in sales as like early stage? And I think like the idea of investing in sales as a founder, like sales first, is actually a really good idea, because you need that feedback loop that sales has, right? So the idea of sales having conversations with potential customers, not just from a standpoint of revenue, but also from a product feedback loop, versus marketing. If you come in with marketing first, in reality, you're kind of, you're creating air cover for a product that maybe doesn't exist or doesn't work, right? So I would say, to answer your question directly, I think it's important to have someone closing. I think the CEO should close the first 20 deals. As I sort of look at successful organizations, even if someone's a technical CEO, and I've had some great conversations with technical CEOs over the last, give it 30 days, people that you would never pick as salespeople, but they are able to convey value and understand the problem that their prospect is facing, and turn that problem into value, and turn them into a customer. And I think that's really important. But right after that sort of first full cycle salesperson, to Kristin's point, then it's all right, like, how do we remove that friction of prospecting and transfer that to someone who's specialized and focused on that role?
So if, let's say, I'm a founder, okay, like many of us in this room, we close 20 deals, do we now hire an SDR, or do we hire the closing rep?
Closing rep.
Closing rep? What's your take on it, Koka?
So I agree with Daniel. I think you have to have a sales first mentality. If you have a product that is viable and it's already kind of in market, you probably don't need the air cover from marketing yet. You need somebody creating that feedback loop, unless you're going to invest in some PMM that's going to be doing market research. But even then, like, I think that in the early stages, like, you've probably done most of that work, or you should have. So you probably don't need to invest even heavier in it. So you should be looking for salespeople. Because at the end of the day, like, if the CEO is doing most of the closing, the CEO is not doing the CEO job. So you have to invest in that space. And then as the deals are coming in, you then have to figure out, like, is it expanding the sales team, and then when do you bring in that marketing person?
Now, Sean, you were that first SDR and then went ahead to grow and manage a team for a while before getting into product. What are the first things that I start to invest in, and like the tactical real stuff, right? Like, I am the founder, I have a closer rep or two. Now I'm like, all right, I got budget to invest in sales development. What do I spend at that moment?
Great question. So we had 2 AEs before I got hired, and we also had amazing marketing. So my CEO, Kyle, is an amazing marketer. So we had air cover, and we had a product, and then we had 2 our inside sales reps that were closing a lot of deals quickly. And so when they brought me in, it was, for 3 weeks they made me do inbound, and I think it was, something like 80, meetings set up in the first 3 weeks, and they're like, okay, you should go to outbound now. We've got this covered. And so the first thing that what they invested in me in was product knowledge, and then knowledge of the space. So it's like you have to learn more about your customer than you are about the company. So we got to understand who are we selling to, why are we selling to them, what's their pain point, and what is the specific context of that pain point. Because if I wasn't able to effectively communicate how we could solve those pains, or it wasn't just reading off a script, that was the first thing we invested in. And then from there, we hired a couple more reps. And then what I learned very quickly is the third person I hired and had to onboard, I hadn't written anything down yet. And so it was a complete going from scratch again. Here's all the tools you need, here's this, here's that. We had a basic checklist, but what it ended up evolving into was a playbook that it's been a living document that we still use today. You start documenting everything you do, and you understand it's going to change probably weekly, maybe daily. But having that artifact to then go off of and hand off to the next person, and then empowering, Daniel's spoken to this before in the past, empowering your team to add modules to that playbook, gives them ownership. They get bought into that process, and then they're helping expand it. So you're always testing things, but you don't have to take complete ownership of it. You can empower the people that you have in place.
And what is, like, let's say, we have some engineers maybe here in the room, and product folks, we think about when we build product, we follow a product requirements that spec, right? Or spec, or PRD, product requirements doc, etc. What is the version 1 of this document look like? So what I'm hearing is there's 2 or 3 closers, 1 or 2 SDRs. What does version 1 look like?
It was a Google Doc with a ton of screenshots, and it was just, it literally was open up Salesforce, click on leads, go down here, click import here, map these 4 things over in the CSV, then write the email. Here's template 1, right? Go in. Here's the send button in Gmail. It was that granular, and it still is that granular, and then it evolved from there. But if if you can document everything you do, then someone else can come and replicate that, because what you're trying to do is optimize and not have to worry about do they know what the 5 steps are to complete it. And then over time, when you're able to optimize certain pieces of that, so what was super painful, like importing from one thing to another, you find a technology or you build it in-house, and it helps, and then takes out a big chunk of the playbook, right? And you can start to whittle it down.
How long until you got out of the V1? Because I'm assuming that the Google Doc was probably up to like V4.
Well, the Google Doc still exists,
Yeah.
But we've also marketized it on our blog. So it still exists, and that's what they're handed on day one. So now what's actually expanded to was here's our company, here's our culture, here's what we care about, here's why. And so there's the first piece of it, which is about the customer and the company, and the second one's about execution, and then the third one's about analytics. So like, what are we measuring? How do we optimize, test, and stuff like that? So we've actually split it up into 3 parts now, but the doc still exists. I actually would love to go back and look at version 1.
Kristin, speaking of analytics and metrics and these sort of things, like what do we start to track day one, right? Like what are those? I mean, are we talking calls? Are we talking touches, activity? I mean, and we're talking day one, because what we realize that we don't want to over-engineer early on, right? We don't want to overthink it, but we have to collect some data to be able to start to understand, hey, what's working, what's not, right? We can't be driving in the dark, right? So what would you say are some of those early metrics you should be looking at?
I mean, early metrics, I feel like you're just looking at results.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, like, you have contacts that you're calling, you're just trying to get them on the phone, that, like, when you get into the stage of optimizing, like, the team and how they're working and how you, like, stack rank people and the activities and conversion rates, like, I feel like that's way further down the line of how you make the team better when there is a team. But when it's just, like, the first SDR or first 2 SDRs and you have, like, very little market share or maybe very little, like, marketing period, like, it's just, how many meetings did you get in the month? Like, how many people, like, how many doors did you just, like, not take, like, where did you not take no for an answer, and how scrappy did you get? And, like, how many faces and, like, introductions did you get me? That I think, like, that ultimately is, at the very beginning, how many meetings, like, give me as many meetings as you can, and, like, that's all that matters. Like, I don't care how you did it.
But there's extra things you learn from those, right? And you take a snapshot of every win, and you figure out what did it take to get there. Because at first, you can't make a hypothesis at first and say, hey, it's going to take me 17 touches over 22 days to do this, and 5 have to be email and whatever. But you can just try all the things, and then you take a snapshot of it and you go, okay, I won here, how did I get there? And you start to file it down, and then you get 10 wins, and you're like, were there any common denominators here, right?
So it's funny, I don't think I've shared this with you, but so first SDR, like second SDR, third SDR, 10th SDR, 34th SDR, each one we would go through this process of, in the first 14 days, they were required to document every single thing that they did, every single person they met, every single thing that they learned during the day, and send that in an email to me and then to the person that I reported into. And that was sort of a way to ensure that they were documenting and actually understanding what they're consuming on a day-to-day basis in the first 14 days of employment, so like 2 weeks. And then doing a voicemail at the end of each day for the first 2 weeks. And the reason why I do that is kind of like the build, measure, learn loop of, okay, so great, you've left a voicemail, this is great, like tomorrow we're going to review it when you come in and like try to improve it for next time. And if you have someone do that for 10 days straight, it's a little scary on their like first and second and third day, but by the time they've done it 10 times, they can actually do it to someone that they don't know. And they've probably had, 10 possibilities for feedback, which by that point, like, they're a pretty sharp spear. I'll let them loose on someone.
We used to make ours call Kyle.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add to that, so many years ago when I was in sales before I moved to the dark side of marketing, as I call it, the best thing that I did as an inside sales rep was I was forced, and I felt like I was being forced, but in the long run it was the best experience that I had, was I had to use the product every single day. And I was required to become almost an expert, to be to the point where I could be the customer service rep for the application itself. Because I think that's another gap that salespeople run into, where they rely so heavily on, the sales engineers or some other support mechanism, and they're not being required to actually understand the nuances of the application. Because when they do use the application, whatever it is that you're selling, on a regular basis, they know how to talk about it. They build that confidence, and that confidence then projects through whatever medium that they're trying to sell through. So yeah, it's just outside the documentation piece, they have to understand the ins and outs of that application.
You can just put them in the support team. We did that for we put them in the support team for 2 or 3 days and just leave them there.
And they
go
have to
figure out
answer
how to
calls
answer.
and everything else.
Or you build a product for salespeople.
Yeah.
Or you do that, right? So let's say, I think what we're hearing here is really number one, hire for the founders here who we're trying to think about building sales processes and sales teams. Hire that first closer, then start to invest in sales development. Start to track some of the basic, activities, which will just start to give you kind of a baseline set of data to look at, and then really become a product expert. And I think this is something we forget a lot of the time. I see founders do this all the time where they're like, well, this individual was such a great salesperson at another company, they should be able to just come on board and do it all over again here, right? And that's not really the way it works. Sean, what advice would you give us around making sure that these folks that we're hiring become product experts?
Well, I think there's one piece I want to touch on then in that one. So the first one's the persona person that you hire as your first SDR is not going to be the persona of the person that you hire as your first AE, because an AE has done it before and they know it, and you're not going to find a guy or girl who's been an SDR for 2 years and it wants to come to your company to be your first SDR. No one, you will not find that. And if you do, then you probably don't want to hire them. And so what you need to find is someone, as our VP of Sales, Derek Grant, says, is punches above their weight class. So on paper, they don't have the experience, they haven't done it, they don't know how to build a process, but you know that they will always exceed expectations. And so in everything they've done, and you can ask this in the interview process about why they chose their college, what things are they interested in, why are they interested in them, like what got them to where they've been, or why do they make their decisions, right? That persona person is someone who doesn't take no for an answer. They know where they want to go, even if it sounds like it's out of reach, and they try to figure out a way to get there, because ultimately this person is going to have to be really self-guided, because you're not going to hire a head of sales development before you hire the first SDR. And so you really have to take a stretch on this person, but then you empower them with the ability to, hey, you're going to come on board and build this process up. And you may hire over them someday, but they're going to be the founding person who really built up a process that then can be scaled. And so, yeah, really take that persona person into consideration.
Kristin, let's say you have, an SDR or two. You're collecting activity data. When do you know, hey, we're doing some things right? Now it's a matter of adding resources, hiring more to follow this process. Like, when do you know the process is moving in the right direction?
I mean, I think it goes back to understanding how much is the investment you've made in either marketing and how much inbound interest you're getting that just needs to get translated and funneled into an AE, and how much you're actually having to generate for yourself. So when I was at Instart, I think when I left, 75% of our closed revenue in the year and a half, almost 2 years that I was there, were from outbounding, just knocking on people's doors and being like, you need to take a meeting with us. We had very few inbound leads. And so as we, month over month, we're getting more and more meetings and getting people to actually talk to us. I think the understanding that we needed to invest in more and more in SDRs who were doing that became clear, versus when I first got to Optimizely, who had grown so quickly, really off of inbound interest. And while we still had a big SDR team, the ability to double down on that versus people who could just close as many deals as coming in as people willing and ready to buy. So I think it's as much of understanding how much grunt work has to happen to generate interest versus how much is kind of knocking at your door, of how much you need to invest in scrappy and hungry but pretty still junior people.
So, Daniel, quick question. So let's say we have a few SDRs, we have a few salespeople. Now it's a matter of starting to create this process around building the SDR team, right? So taking it from 2 to 10, 15, etc. How do I start to do that? How do I start at the very top, which is identifying the talent and putting them through an interview process? What are some tips you would provide us around that? Because I found that part of the process is incredibly important.
Yeah, Thanks, George. Good question. I love interviewing. I spoke to someone yesterday or the day before, and not that like I actually like doing interviews myself too. But I wrote a post sort of midway through last year, so probably March of last year. My experience, so what I've learned from 1,000 interviews. At this point, I think I'm about 1,800 is my guess. I don't believe in internal recruiters that do the first round of interviews. I think that, like, if you're a hiring manager and you want someone to join your team, like, you should be the person actually bringing them on. And so while that's a time-consuming exercise, I've never had a person leave my team. I've collectively led roughly 50 people. I've let 3 go. So 50 people from 1,800, like, you can do the math. And I think it's a function of, like, you just have to apply a level of rigor that's almost like demand generation, right? So there's a great post from Dan at Greylock Partners. He has run recruiting there for quite some time. I have a lot of respect for him. He ran recruiting at Facebook, of sort of the 100 rule, which is basically you're going to look at about 100 resumes / 100 LinkedIn profiles. That's going to lead to about 15 interviews. That's going to lead to 1 hire. And if you apply that level of rigor, and I've still not been able to get to that point, but if you apply that level of rigor through, like, a multitude of recruiters, of your own searching, of, like, campus recruiting, any possible channel you can get people to be excited about joining your company, that turns into an amazing team who will cross fire, cross water, do anything to work for your company. And I think that's the piece that many people overlook as the company gets larger. After they get 3 or 4 hires, they're like, great, so we're hiring a sales recruiter, right? Like, this person's going to do the first round of interview. So you're trusting someone that's never led a team before to do the first round of quote-unquote culling. That's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do those steps look like? Like, what are the real steps, right? So it's, you get a resume, you give them a call or you send them an email. What do you put them through after that?
I will never do a phone screen. I don't like phone screens at all. I think it's a disservice because I think at the end of the day, while many of the jobs are inside sales, and specifically for SDR, it's probably over the phone. There's a lot of things you can actually prep based on and sort of gauge based on someone's in-person appearance and sort of their amount of investment they've made for this interview. So if you think about it, right, it's 30 minutes of their time, it's 30 minutes of your time. So you could do a 30-minute phone screen or you could do a 30-minute in-person. I'll take the 30-minute in-person every single time. I've got more data points to assess this person on. So did they come prepared to answer questions on our competitors? So I'm going to ask them a question on the competitors. They don't have Google in front of them. They're not wearing their pajamas. There's nowhere they can hide. Like, go. And if I ask them, like, hey, so how do you think we fit in the space? Blank look, don't know. Great, you're done. So I think, like, first off, you're going to do a 30-minute interview. You may as well do it in person. It's no extra time on your side. And, you know, within minutes, you can usually tell whether someone's actually come prepared, because you come prepared to succeed or you come prepared to fail.
Koka, what are some of the questions you would recommend, you know, sales development leaders to ask during these, you know, these interviews processes?
So I think, you know, as an SDR, it's usually one of your very first jobs out of school, right? So you're not going to have a lot of, like, work experience that you're going to be getting out of them. So you have to find other creative ways, and I think some of this was already touched on, right? You have to ask them questions about what gets them fired up, what makes them tick, what are they interested in, and actually hear them going through it. Let's find out if they're even articulate. Because if they're not articulate and can't explain to you why they chose a specific school or why they moved across state, you're going to run into issues. I think the questions about competitors might be a little rough, but granted, if they came prepared and they can answer that, kudos to them. That's
so is it more about their delivery than the actual accuracy?
I think so. I mean, that's my opinion of it. And again, I've never led a sales team, but in my experience with the young and hungry reps, you need to find that fire. and you need to understand why it is they want this job. And if they can articulate and explain to you why they are the right person for this job, and it's not just, I needed a job, so I'm here and like applying for things, which is going to be, I would think, like 80% of the resumes you get, right?
Yeah.
You find those people who actually get it, and I think that's asking the competitors question is an excellent, segue into it. If they know that information, they're probably a keeper. I mean, regardless of like any other flubs in that process, and I totally agree with it. Everybody that I've ever hired, I've never done a phone screen. And I've never actually heard anybody say this before, and I've never actually thought it through, but everybody comes in person because of those data points. What did they wear? How do they come across? What's their body language like? Because all of that is just talking points, or it speaks volumes outside of what they're going to say on the phone. And there's so many different things that come through a phone conversation that are nonverbal, and you have to be able to get in front of that person to see what they're like. Because ideally, if you're hiring an SDR, it's an investment in your company. And if you're investing in your company and hiring this person, you should probably be looking at them to say, what's their next move? Are they going to be an AE? Are they even material for something like that? And if they're not able to get through some of these initial questions, they're probably not going to be, pop out on the other side and be like, a rock star employee for you. So you have to bring them in-house, and you have to kind of feel them out through there.
I also want to say the person you probably hire as your first SDR is going to be very different than the person you hire at your 20th SDR.
Yeah, let's unpack.
Yeah, so I want to say as far as I know
unpack
Sean
that,
and I both have said we started as the first SDR, and I think there was certain skill sets or whatever that came from I'm building out an entire process. I built our entire Salesforce, everything as far as I trained every AE that came on. There was, because I had a separate job, a previous job before that I had a certain skill set that my boss, our VP of sales who hired me, was okay, there's certain things that you can do that you can then scale from there, versus if you have a bunch of those when you have a team of 25 and they all think that they're going to be CEOs or VP of sales someday, that's a really hard situation of I'm sorry you haven't been promoted in 6 months. It's calm down. And so I think it does grow as far as hunger, work ethic, attitude, there's certain things that you are always looking for, but as far as aptitude to build and be an entrepreneur as the first SDR versus someone who is, I want to be an AE, I want to be an AE so badly, I am going to grind it out of this SDR as the 20th through whatever SDR, it is a little different profile.
Just one more thing to add on that is, so that first person is likely not going to settle for, they don't want to be an AE. And the reason being is that because they're builders, right? And you don't know, you can't look at someone and say, are you a builder? But the reason I like the college question is because, hey, why did you go to school where you did? And a lot of times well, my dad went there, or my mom went there, right? Or, I wanted to be.
Notice his Georgia accent there.
Yeah.
He is from Georgia, by the way.
I am from Georgia. Sorry. And I went to the University of Georgia. And I chose it for a unique reason. But the thing is, what you want to find out is, well, I chose this school because they had the #1 program on this, random thing or whatever that I was really passionate about, and so I tried really hard to get there. Or, they had this opportunity to do this other thing. It's the person that thinks beyond. It's not step 1. They're thinking step 4, right?